Hello, friends, and welcome to another spine-chilling episode on our channel. Tonight, I have something truly special for you. A story that came to me during the darkest hours of night, when the boundary between our world and whatever lies beyond seems thinnest. What I'm about to share with you isn't just another ghost story. The Blackwood Curse explores something far more terrifying than simple hauntings. The horror of inheritance, of bloodlines that carry dark secrets, and ancient evils that patiently wait for their due. Imagine discovering you're the last living member of a family you never knew existed. Imagine inheriting a grand mansion filled with shadows that move when they shouldn't, and whispers that call your name when no one is there. This is Elizabeth Harmon's reality as she steps into Blackwood Manor, unaware that every 70 years, someone of Blackwood blood disappears without a trace. I suggest you dim your lights, put on your headphones, and prepare yourself for the next 30 minutes of unrelenting dread. This story contains elements that might disturb some viewers: ancestral sacrifice, supernatural entities, and the terrible price of family legacy. For those brave enough to continue, let me tell you about the haunting of Blackwood Manor, a house that hungers, and the bloodline that feeds it. In the shadows of the ancient Blackwood Manor, whispers echo through the corridors like restless spirits seeking escape. Elizabeth Harmon stood before the imposing iron gates, her hands trembling as she clutched the yellowed envelope containing the unexpected inheritance documents. The mansion loomed against the twilight sky, its Gothic architecture a testament to a bygone era. "So this is it," she murmured to herself. Pushing the creaking gate open, autumn leaves danced around her feet as she made her way up the gravel path, each step bringing her closer to a past she never knew existed. The lawyer's words still rang in her ears. "A distant relative, Ms. Harmon. You are the last of the Blackwood line." Elizabeth had always felt like an orphan, bounced between foster homes until adulthood granted her freedom. Now, at 27, she possessed a mansion with history stretching back centuries. The key felt unnaturally cold in her palm. The massive wooden door groaned in protest as she pushed it open. Musty air rushed to greet her, carrying the scent of dust, decay, and something else, something ancient and undefinable. Elizabeth fumbled for a light switch, finding only antique gas lamps mounted on the walls. "Welcome home," a voice whispered, so faint she thought she'd imagined it. Elizabeth spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Hello? Is someone there?" Only silence answered, broken by the distant ticking of a grandfather clock from somewhere deep within the house. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Elizabeth ventured further into the entrance hall. Moonlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across marble floors. Portraits lined the walls, faces of stern men and women with the same piercing blue eyes that Elizabeth saw in her mirror every morning. They seemed to watch her, their gazes following as she moved through the room. "I'm being ridiculous," she muttered, trying to smile despite the oppressive atmosphere weighing down upon her. "It's just an old house. My house." The floorboards creaked beneath her feet as she made her way toward what appeared to be a living room. Furniture draped in white sheets resembled ghostly figures frozen in time. Elizabeth pulled away one sheet, revealing an ornate velvet sofa that seemed remarkably well preserved despite its age. A photograph in a silver frame caught her eye, sitting on a nearby table. Elizabeth picked it up, wiping away years of dust to reveal a family: father, mother, and a little girl with familiar blue eyes. The glass was cracked, splitting the image right through the child's face. "That's Clara," came a voice behind her, soft but clear. Elizabeth screamed, dropping the photograph. The frame shattered on the floor as she whirled around to face a thin man in his 70s, his white hair neatly combed. "Forgive me," he said with a slight bow. "I didn't mean to startle you. I'm Walter Griffith, the caretaker. I've maintained Blackwood Manor for 40 years. "You nearly gave me a heart attack," Elizabeth gasped, her hand pressed against her chest. "Don't you knock?" Walter's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "I live in the cottage beyond the garden, Miss Harmon. I've been expecting you." Elizabeth looked down at the broken frame, guilt washing over her. "I'm sorry about this." "No matter," Walter replied, bending stiffly to collect the pieces. "Things break in this house all the time, especially when they concern Clara." "Clara?" Elizabeth repeated, remembering the name he'd spoken. "Who was she?" Walter's expression darkened as he straightened up, clutching the damaged photograph. "Your great-aunt, Miss Harmon. She disappeared in this house when she was just 8 years old, never found despite months of searching." A chill ran down Elizabeth's spine, despite the summer heat pressing through the windows. "What happened to her?" "That's the mystery of Blackwood Manor," Walter replied, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Some say she wandered into the woods and got lost. Others believe something in this house took her." "Something?" Elizabeth echoed, not liking the implication of his words. Walter's eyes met hers, his gaze sharp despite his advanced age. "This house has stood for over 200 years, Miss Harmon. It has seen birth and death, joy and tragedy. The walls remember, even when people forget." Elizabeth swallowed hard, suddenly wondering if accepting this inheritance had been a mistake. The rational part of her mind dismissed Walter's cryptic words as the ramblings of an old man steeped too long in local superstition. Yet something deeper, more primitive, sensed truth in his warning. "I've prepared the master bedroom for your stay," Walter continued, moving toward the grand staircase. "Unless you'd prefer another room?" "The master bedroom is fine," Elizabeth replied, grabbing her suitcase. She followed him up the stairs, noticing how the wood groaned beneath their feet. The second-floor corridor stretched in both directions, doors lining each side. Walter led her to the end of the hallway, where double doors carved with intricate designs awaited them. "This was your great-grandfather's room," Walter explained, pushing the doors open, "and his father's before him." The bedroom was surprisingly well-maintained, with a massive four-poster bed dominating the center of the room. Heavy velvet curtains framed tall windows overlooking the overgrown garden. An antique writing desk sat in one corner beside a bookshelf filled with leather-bound volumes. "It's beautiful," Elizabeth admitted, setting her suitcase on a chest at the foot of the bed. "Dinner will be ready at 7, Walter informed her, moving back toward the door. "The dining room is on the first floor, east wing." "Wait," Elizabeth called, as he turned to leave. "You mentioned Clara's disappearance, but what about her parents?" "My great-grandparents, I assume." Walter paused, his hand resting on the doorframe. "Consumed by grief, both of them. Your great-grandfather shot himself in his study 6 months after Clara vanished. Your great-grandmother lived another decade, though many say she died the day Clara disappeared. She never spoke another word until her death. Just wandered the halls at night, calling her daughter's name." With those cheerful thoughts, Walter departed, leaving Elizabeth alone in the vast bedroom. She sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the weight of family tragedy she'd never known about until now. The room felt colder than it should in summer, prompting Elizabeth to wrap her arms around herself for warmth. A soft scratching sound drew her attention to the writing desk, where it seemed something was moving across the wood. Rising slowly, Elizabeth approached the desk. The scratching stopped as suddenly as it had begun. She examined the surface carefully, finding nothing but a thin layer of dust, disturbed by what looked like tiny fingerprints. Just the house settling, she told herself firmly, though she didn't quite believe it. Deciding to unpack later, Elizabeth left to explore the rest of her new home. The hallways of Blackwood Manor seemed to shift and change as she wandered, doorways appearing where she could have sworn none existed minutes before. Time lost meaning as she discovered room after room, each filled with relics of the past. A music room with a grand piano, its ivory keys yellowed with age. A nursery with toys arranged as if waiting for a child who never returned. A library with thousands of books, some in languages Elizabeth couldn't identify. By the time she found the dining room, the grandfather clock was striking 7. Walter had laid out a simple but elegant meal on the massive oak table. Elizabeth sat at one end, feeling small and insignificant in the cavernous room. "I hope everything is to your liking, Miss Harmon," Walter said, appearing silently at her side. Elizabeth jumped slightly, still unnerved by his ability to move so quietly. "Yes, thank you. It looks delicacelicious." Walter filled her wine glass with dark red liquid that caught the candlelight like bloody rubies. "Local vintage," he explained. "The Blackwood cellars are quite extensive." As Elizabeth ate, she noticed Walter hovering nearby, clearly wanting to speak, yet hesitant. "Is something wrong?" she finally asked. "It's not my place," he began, then seemed to reconsider. "But as someone who has served this house for decades, I feel I should warn you." Elizabeth set down her fork. Her appetite suddenly diminished. "Warn me about what?" "The anniversary approaches," Walter said enigmatically. 3 days from now will mark exactly 70 years since Clara disappeared. The house changes during this time. "Changes how?" Elizabeth asked, though part of her didn't want to know. "Doors that were locked become unlocked. Voices echo through empty rooms." And sometimes, Walter trailed off, his eyes distant. "Sometimes people see her." Elizabeth shivered despite herself. "You mean Clara? You think she haunts this place?" "I think some tragedies leave marks that never fade," Walter replied carefully. "I'll leave you to your dinner, Miss Harmon. But should you need anything during the night, there's an old telephone in the study. My number's written beside it." With that, he departed, leaving Elizabeth alone with her thoughts and half-eaten meal. Despite her skepticism regarding ghosts and hauntings, the caretaker's words had planted a seed of unease that refused to be ignored. After dinner, Elizabeth returned to her bedroom, the journey taking twice as long as she repeatedly took wrong turns in the labyrinthine corridors. By the time she reached the master suite, exhaustion had settled deep in her bones. She changed quickly into pajamas and slipped between the sheets of the massive bed. Despite her fatigue, sleep proved elusive. The house creaked and settled around her, each sound amplified in the nighttime silence. Wind rattled the windows, and somewhere distant, water dripped with metronomic precision. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were troubled. She ran through endless corridors, pursuing the echo of a child's laughter. Every door she opened revealed another hallway, another staircase, the architecture impossible and ever-changing. Behind her, something dark and formless pursued, its presence felt rather than seen. "Help me," a small voice called, seeming to come from everywhere at once. Elizabeth spun around, trying to locate the source. "Where are you?" "I'm lost," the voice replied. "Closer now. I can't find my way home." A door materialized before her, different from the others, made of black wood with a silver handle shaped like a raven's head. Without thinking, Elizabeth reached for it. She woke with a gasp, sitting upright in bed. Moonlight streamed through a gap in the curtains, casting the room in silver shadows. Elizabeth's heart pounded as she tried to shake off the lingering tendrils of her dream. A soft sound caught her attention. The patter of small feet running down the hallway outside her door, followed by a child's giggle, high and clear in the midnight silence. Elizabeth froze, straining to listen. The footsteps stopped just outside her room, followed by a light scratching against the wood. "Hello," she called, her voice barely above a whisper. The scratching stopped. Then, slowly, the door handle began to turn. Elizabeth held her breath as the door inched open, revealing only darkness beyond. She reached for the lamp on her nightstand, fingers fumbling for the switch. Light flooded the room, illuminating nothing. The doorway was empty, the hallway beyond silent and still. Rising from bed on unsteady legs, Elizabeth moved to the door, peering cautiously into the hallway. Empty in both directions, yet she could have sworn she'd heard footsteps. As she turned to close the door, something on the floor caught her eye. Bending down, Elizabeth examined what appeared to be small, wet footprints. Child-sized, they led from her doorway down the hall before disappearing near the staircase. Elizabeth's mouth went dry. She told herself there must be a logical explanation, perhaps water leaking from somewhere above, forming patterns that merely resembled footprints. Yet even as she formulated this rational explanation, she knew it was a lie. Too unsettled to return to bed, Elizabeth grabbed her robe and followed the vanished trail toward the staircase. The grandfather clock in the hallway showed just past 3 in the morning, the witching hour. The house felt different at night, the corridors stretching longer than she remembered, the ceilings higher, the shadows deeper. Elizabeth descended the staircase slowly, one hand trailing along the banister for reassurance. In the entrance hall, moonlight spilled through the stained glass windows, painting the marble floor with colorful patterns. Elizabeth paused, suddenly uncertain of her path. What exactly was she hoping to find? A soft melody drifted from somewhere within the house. A simple tune played on a piano. Elizabeth followed the sound to the music room she'd discovered earlier. The door stood ajar, golden lamplight spilling into the hallway. Heart pounding, Elizabeth pushed the door open wider. The grand piano sat in the center of the room, exactly as she remembered it. But now, the fallboard was raised, exposing the keys. As she watched, several keys depressed on their own, continuing the haunting melody. "Clara!" Elizabeth whispered, the name feeling strangely natural on her tongue. The music stopped abruptly. The room temperature plummeted, Elizabeth's breath fogging in the suddenly frigid air. From the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of something. A small figure in a white dress, standing in the shadows near the window. Elizabeth turned slowly, afraid of what she might see, but the corner was empty. Only the curtains moving gently, despite the absence of a breeze. "I know you're here," Elizabeth said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I want to help you." A giggle echoed through the room, followed by the sound of running feet. Something brushed past Elizabeth, cold as ice water, raising goosebumps along her arm. She spun around, catching sight of a small figure disappearing through the doorway. Without thinking, Elizabeth gave chase, following the sound of retreating footsteps down the corridor. The pursuit led her deeper into the house, through rooms she hadn't yet explored. A solarium, filled with dead plants. A chamber whose walls were covered entirely in mirrors, reflecting Elizabeth's frightened face from every angle. A narrow staircase spiraling downward into darkness. Elizabeth hesitated at the top of these stairs, instinct warning her against descending. Yet the sound of a child's faint weeping from below compelled her onward. The stairs led to a part of the house that felt older, cruder than the rest. Rough stone walls replaced elegant paneling, and the air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. Elizabeth realized she must be in the foundation of the original structure, perhaps even older than Blackwood Manor itself. "Clara?" she called, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "I want to help you." The weeping stopped abruptly, replaced by whispers. Multiple voices now, speaking too rapidly and too softly for Elizabeth to understand the words. They seemed to come from behind a heavy wooden door at the end of the corridor, its surface carved with symbols Elizabeth didn't recognize. As she approached the door, the whispers grew more urgent, more insistent. Elizabeth reached for the iron handle, then paused, sudden fear freezing her in place. "She wasn't the first," came Walter's voice from behind her. "And she wasn't the last." Elizabeth whirled around, finding the caretaker standing at the foot of the stairs, a lantern in his hand. His face looked different in the unsteady light, older, harder, his eyes reflecting the flames with an unnatural glow. "What are you talking about?" Elizabeth asked, taking an involuntary step backward. "The Blackwoods have always made sacrifices for their prosperity," Walter continued, advancing slowly. "A child every 70 years, blood of their blood to feed what lives behind that door." Elizabeth's back pressed against the carved wood, her mind struggling to process Walter's words. "That's insane. You're talking about ritual murder. My family couldn't possibly." "Why do you think you were brought here now?" Walter interrupted, his voice eerily calm. 3 days before the anniversary, the last Blackwood returned home just in time. Realization dawned with horrifying clarity. "The lawyer who found me, he works for you?" Walter smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "He works for the house, as do I. As did my father before me, and his father before him. Caretakers, we call ourselves. Ensuring the covenant remains unbroken. Ensuring the sacrifice is made." Elizabeth's hand fumbled behind her for the door handle, desperate to escape, to find another exit. "Stay back," she warned, though she had nothing to defend herself with. "You don't understand," Walter continued, moving closer still. "I'm not the threat. I merely serve. It's what waits behind you that hungers." As if on cue, the door behind Elizabeth began to warm beneath her palm, the wood pulsing like something alive and breathing. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, no longer coming from behind the door, but somehow from within the wood itself. Elizabeth jerked her hand away, but too late. The door swung open of its own accord, revealing not a room, but a swirling vortex of shadows deeper than the darkest night. Tendrils of darkness reached out, wrapping around Elizabeth's wrists like living vines. She screamed, struggling against their grip as they pulled her inexorably backward. Walter made no move to help, merely watching with detached interest. "The cycle continues," he intoned, his voice fading as the darkness enveloped Elizabeth. "Blood of their blood, the house must be fed." As she was dragged into the void, Elizabeth caught a glimpse of faces in the shadows, dozens of children with hollow eyes and reaching hands. Among them, A little girl in a white dress, her features an echo of Elizabeth's own. "Welcome home," Clara whispered, her voice joining the chorus of the lost. The door slammed shut, cutting off Elizabeth's final scream. 3 days later, Walter Griffith stood in the entrance hall of Blackwood Manor, greeting a young man in an expensive suit. "Mr. Leeds," the caretaker said, with a slight bow. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." The lawyer nodded, glancing around nervously. "Has there been any sign of Miss Harmon? Her sudden disappearance is most concerning." "None," Walter replied, his expression appropriately solemn. "She simply vanished, much like her great-aunt 70 years ago. Perhaps the Blackwood curse is more than just a legend." Mr. Leeds frowned, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, in the absence of an heir, the property reverts to the Blackwood Trust, which you represent. I've brought the papers for your signature." Walter accepted the documents with a thin smile. "The house appreciates your service." As the lawyer departed, Walter locked the massive front door and turned to face the empty entryway. Not entirely empty, though. To his trained eye, the shadows moved differently now, more vibrant, more alive. 70 years, he murmured to the darkness. "Rest now. Digest your meal." Somewhere deep within the house came the sound of a child's laughter, quickly joined by another, and then another, and another, until the entire mansion echoed with the mirth of those never to grow old. Walter smiled and began preparing the house for its long slumber. 70 years would pass quickly enough, and the cycle would begin again. After all, there was always another Blackwood somewhere in the world, unaware of their heritage, unaware of their destiny. The hunger would eventually return, and the house would call its blood home. If you enjoyed this chilling tale of ancestral horror and supernatural mystery, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more original horror stories that explore the darkest corners of human fear and imagination. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think happened to all the disappeared Blackwoods? What ancient entity lurks beneath the manor? Your support helps this channel continue creating the spine-tingling content you love.